What does it mean to look behind a game's curtain? Before we answer this question, we need to consider what a game's curtain is. For the sake of this video, a curtain is the veil that divides the intended immersive engagement with a game from the underlying mechanics and systems that control the game world. To brush against a game's curtain is to acknowledge the limitations in the intended play of the game. Why can't I romance the bandit leader instead of fighting them? To look behind the game's curtain is more complicated. For nearly 9 years, I've been enthralled by the world of The Witcher 3. It binds together the story, gameplay loop, and numerous missable details that CDPR lovingly baked into the game. From the villages of Velen, the seas of Skellige, the world is so full of hurt, horrors, and yet, despite it all, hope. No matter how many times I hear those somber strings, I'm transported back in time to White Orchard, and the start of an unforgettable journey. To me, Kaer Morhen sounds like home. According to my Steam achievements, I started my first playthrough of The Witcher 3 in 2016, although it feels like earlier. From the initial boot up, I was aware of the game's curtain. I played an old family PC that could barely manage 20 FPS at the lowest graphics settings. This playthrough was spent spamming through dialogue options and cutscenes as fast as I could because the lag they made my game unplayable. Only much later would I upgrade to a 1030 graphics card that gave me the long-desired 30 FPS at 1080p, although still with low graphics settings. In late May 2016, The Witcher 3's second expansion, Blood and Wine, released. In this French fairytale countryside, full of warm meadows, knights, and a host of vampires, I first crossed behind the curtain. Despite being unlocked in the middle of the main quest, Blood and Wine is leveled for the endgame, in post-endgame at that. When I found out that there were some features in the DLC that could only be unlocked within New Game Plus, I took one of my latest save files, booted over to New Game Plus, and rushed through the main quest quicker than I ever had before just to experience the new content and the new things locked behind New Game Plus. My underleveled gear could not support the lightest attack from the enemies, and my sword dealt little to no damage. So what did I do in this scenario? Did I back up and play more of the game and get a higher level so I can enjoy the DLC? No, I modded the game and passed behind the curtain for the first time. With the realization that even in God mode, I couldn't deal enough damage to kill the enemies, I took a step away from The Witcher 3 and came back to it 2 years later when I was ready to visit Toussaint again. Do you remember the first time you went hollow in Dark Souls? The first time you gave up? Years before I heard the name Lordran, or one of the game's many iconic boss themes, I first heard of Dark Souls on a middle school soccer field of all places. The game's difficulty was, of course, its selling point, and I couldn't help but be a little intimidated by it. Years later, after buying the game for the price of a candy bar, I experienced the infamous "You Die" screen more than a few times. My very first playthrough of Dark Souls only lasted a few hours. After making my way out of the Undead Asylum into Undeadburg, I found myself trapped at the level's central bonfire. Weighed down with my chainmail and struggling past every encounter, I found myself unwilling to continue onwards. I accepted that I knew almost nothing about the game, and maybe the legends were right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for Dark Souls. Like many other players, I was fascinated by its old, interconnected world and obtuse game systems. I stared down the curtain, absorbed by its immensity and the way it obscured even the simplest game mechanics, but my motivation was lacking, and I just stepped away, unwilling to engage with the struggle of the game until I knew more about it. How big is Skyrim? The initial answer you might get is around 14 square miles. While this may seem substantial, it's not even 3/4 the size of Dulles Airport. Considering all of the dungeons and DLC maps, you're likely to get a larger number, but this still isn't the true size. You might count Skyrim's size in the number of name quests, armor sets, and spells, but these are also not representative of its true size. You might not get that I'm asking about Skyrim's size, but really, how far its curtain is. Even on someone's first playthrough, they'll notice at level 10 how every guard seems to start thinking about joining the Dawnguard, or strange cultists appear in the major cities. They'll notice at level 20 how orcish armor begins to appear in the loot pool, and how at level 30 every Draugr seemed to have trained its way up to Deathlord while the Dragonborn was away. As you play, the game becomes more transparent, and the proverbial Skyrim doors harder to overlook. In truth, Skyrim's size is exactly as big as your willingness to not look through its illusion. On PC, Skyrim's size exactly matches your ignorance of what the tilde key does, and at that point, you've already moved beyond the veil. What does it look like when the illusion breaks? To look behind the curtain. TFC allows the player to see the blue hell surrounding every cell. TWF removes all textures and reveals the wire mesh holding the world together. COC, QA Smoke, takes you to a room initially looking like many other dungeons, but one that contains literally every item in the game. A god's treasure vault, or just a developer's debug room. A player's initial reaction might be that these discoveries actually expand the world and give them more ways to interact with it. This is only partially true. Once you move behind the curtain, you cease to exist with the game as a real space, instead interact with it as a set of operations and mechanics. You don't just play the game, but with it, choosing to interact with the game systems in the way the developers intended or not. In our current day, Skyrim is less of a game and more of a medium. With native mod support and over 6.7 billion downloads on Nexus mods alone, you can never play Skyrim the way someone did in 2011. The world and illusion that the game was famous for hardly even exists anymore. My return to Lordaeron was aided by much needed knowledge about the game's mechanics and a look behind its curtain. The Master Key could be used to unlock the Valley of the Drakes in Blighttown early. In Undead Parish, there was a blacksmith who could upgrade my weapon. My second playthrough of Dark Souls ended in Anor Londo. Weighed down by a combination of the Silver Knights and Havelset, I found myself unable to pass the famous duo boss guarding the Princess's Chamber. Having gone through Blighttown backwards, I had never passed through the depths and picked up the Large Ember, so I fought Ornstein Snow with an under-level +5 Zweihander. Barely able to stomach the long boss run back and facing an ever-dwindling pool of humanity, I just stopped. I resolved to fully look behind Dark Souls' curtain and unveil every secret the game had. I learned about the entire world space, all the bosses, their lore, how to cheese them. I watched a VODvidya and learned about every single way to upgrade weapons, and the importance of DS Fix above it all. But by the time I finished, it wasn't really Dark Souls anymore. Looking through the game's curtain had destroyed the illusion. Breaking the mystique of the legend somehow made the game smaller and the flaws more visible. Dark Souls, especially on PC, is an unfinished game. A low-quality port from console and inherent bugs from the action queuing system have left numerous exploits in every version of the game. Tumble buffing, wrong warps, and meme rolls, just to name a few. Some of these can be overlooked, but no player survived Dark Souls' late game without facing the harsh reality of an unfinished development. Repeat bosses, poor level design, and inconsistent scaling emphasize an unmissable difficulty when compared to the early game. Since its release, some players have torn aside the veil between play and production, using mods and developer tools to fully dissect the game and understand some of the mechanics that have been obscured since launch. I've completed my own fair share of modded Dark Souls playthroughs, namely randomizer runs and Daughters of Ash. But none of these were really Dark Souls anymore. Modded versions of the game leave the player in a limbo world, where they know they are meant to engage with the game and as someone uninitiated would. But repeated exposure behind the curtain leaves the game feeling changed and uncanny. A familiar world where nothing is quite right. Through my modded playthroughs of The Witcher 3, I looked well behind the curtain. Did you know that the Blood and Wine map is unique, that the collision for the game world goes beyond the edge of the map? Normally a stroll behind the world's edge and the teleport wall will leave you falling through the floor into a blue void. Not so in Tucson. Tucson's collision goes out to the literal edge of the map, a detail which is often unmentioned. Everyone talks about the developer photo at the top of Mount Gorgon, but not that you can actually walk there, or that a modded version of the game is required to do so. Did you know that Gontardim's puzzle dimension can be found just off the east side of Velen? Or that you can see Vizima from White Orchard? When I traveled through time and space with Avallac'h, I discovered many things beyond the curtain in many different worlds. Through Time and Space is a quest near to the end of the main campaign of Witcher 3. Geralt and the elf Avallac'h must pass through several different dimensions in order to reach the world of the Enel to recruit one of Eredin's captains to their cause. On your journey, you pass through a desert that was once the bottom of the sea, an alien forest, underwater ruins of an ancient civilization, and finally, a world overtaken by the White Frost. But did you know all these set pieces are on the same map? None of the set pieces are terribly interesting behind the curtain. For the most part, the set pieces are all there is. collision falls away quickly, level geometries are not coherent, and the only secrets left to find are those left for the player to discover on their one-time trip through the map. And yet, I still love it. I explore these artifacts with the ones who came before me, discovered that the world was, of course, made by human hands. Because of the nature of the world itself, all the things that put there intentionally, even if they were never used to their full purpose. Somewhere during the development process, CDPR imagined a set piece of a colossal frozen soldier, larger than almost anything else in game. I imagine it was cut when they realized it was too far away to render from a vantage point that could take it in its whole scale. Looking behind the curtain in our favorite games reveals the artifice of human hands that made them, and how using the same developer tools, we can shape the games that we love. These curtains are unavoidable facts in the medium, and something that more cinematic experiences try to hide entirely from the player's view, due to their shameful nature. To acknowledge the curtain is to acknowledge the artifice of the world. To look behind the curtain is to see the tools that were used in its creation. Our physical world is not without such curtains, hiding the constructions of ethics and laws, the very mechanics by which we live our lives. But they're still curtains, barriers constructed by human hands to obscure the constructions of our reality. And to acknowledge the curtains and look behind them even, is to accept an old creed, that nothing is true, everything is permitted. Hey, so welcome to the post video. This originally started out as an idea for me to pretty much just talk about The Witcher 3 and some of the things that I saw behind the scenes during my time while playing, and eventually ballooned to wherever you see now. So if you like it, like and subscribe, that'd be cool, and I will see you all in the next one. Until then, stay safe and live well.